When we think of Rome's rise to power, it's easy to imagine the Italian peninsula as the starting point and the Mediterranean as its natural stage. But the journey from local dominance to Mediterranean supremacy was neither smooth nor guaranteed. Before Rome could project power across the Aegean, it had to face a world that seemed beyond its grasp, the Hellenistic kingdoms of Greece and Macedonia. These were lands of culture, strategy, and centuries of warfare, where phalanxes and war elephants dominated the battlefield, and city-states had long histories of diplomacy and intrigue. How did a city-state of farmers and soldiers, hardened by wars in Italy, come to challenge such formidable powers? How did Rome, a relatively new player in the Eastern Mediterranean, confront kings who had inherited Alexander the Great's legacy and armies trained in classical traditions? And how did a series of conflicts, now known as the Macedonian Wars, reshape the balance of power across the Greek world forever? In this video, I'm going to discuss all of this, how it began, what happened, and how it changed the world. So without any delay, let's start. The origins of Rome's involvement in Greece were not simple acts of imperial ambition. For much of the early 2nd century BCE, Rome's eastern interests were reactive, driven by alliances, treaties, and the requests of Greek states that feared their neighbors more than Rome itself. The Hellenistic world was fractured. Following Alexander's death, his empire had splintered into multiple kingdoms ruled by his generals and their successors. Among these, the Antigonid dynasty controlled Macedonia, the Seleucid Empire stretched across Asia Minor and Mesopotamia, and the Ptolemies dominated Egypt. Each state was powerful in its own right, with professional armies, sophisticated tactics, and wealth to fund years of campaigning. Rome, by contrast, had built strength through the manipulation of Italian alliances, the disciplined manipular legion, and its experience in Italy and Sicily. Facing the Hellenistic kings required more than courage; it required adaptation. Rome's first serious entanglement with Macedonia came during what would later be called the First Macedonian War, from 214 to 205 BCE, overlapping with the Second Punic War against Hannibal. At this point, Rome was not seeking conquest in Greece, but rather trying to secure its southern flank while Carthage threatened Italy. Philip V of Macedonia saw opportunity in Rome's distraction, forging alliances with Hannibal and attempting to spread his influence westward into Illyria and the Adriatic. The Greek city-states, particularly those in the Aetolian League, feared Macedonian expansion and sought Roman protection. Rome responded cautiously, dispatching legions to Illyria and forming alliances that were as much about countering Macedon as projecting Roman power. What followed was a war marked less by decisive battles than by maneuvering, diplomacy, and occasional skirmishes. Rome's traditional strength lay in the manipular legion, yet the Macedonian army relied on the phalanx, war elephants, and skilled cavalry. On open plains, the phalanx could be nearly invincible, its long sarissas forming a wall of steel and spear. The Romans had learned in Italy how to fight mountain tribes and adapt formations, but facing the Hellenistic phalanx required a new level of strategic thinking. Rome's commanders relied heavily on alliances with Greek states and naval support to offset Macedonian advantages on land. The war ended inconclusively in 205 BCE with a peace treaty that left Philip V largely in control of Macedonia. On the surface, Rome had gained little in territorial terms, yet this conflict achieved something equally important. It introduced Rome to Greek warfare, diplomacy, and culture. Roman generals now understood the complexity of the Hellenistic world and the challenge of projecting power far from Italy. More importantly, Rome had learned that influence could be gained not only through conquest, but through strategic alliances and by exploiting rivalries among Greek states. The stage for the Second Macedonian War, 200 to 197 BCE, was set by continued Greek appeals for Roman assistance. Philip V, emboldened by the inconclusive peace of the First Macedonian War, began to exert greater control over the Greek city-states, threatening the delicate balance of power in the region. The Aetolian League, fearing the loss of autonomy, appealed once more to Rome. This time, Rome responded more decisively, sending a substantial army under Titus Quinctius Flamininus, an experienced commander who understood both Roman military practice and Greek diplomacy. Flamininus's campaign was notable not just for its battles, but for its political strategy. Rome was still an outsider in Greece, and direct conquest was risky. Flamininus combined military pressure with careful diplomacy, promising Greek cities autonomy under Roman protection, a tactic that undermined Macedonian alliances. Battles such as those at Sino-Japanese in 197 BCE demonstrated Rome's growing ability to adapt to the Macedonian phalanx. At Sino-Japanese, the uneven terrain broke the cohesion of Philip's phalanx, allowing Roman manipular units to exploit gaps and outmaneuver the heavier formations. The victory was decisive, marking the first major defeat of a Hellenistic phalanx by a Roman legion. Beyond the battlefield, the consequences were profound. Rome proclaimed the freedom of the Greeks at the Isthmian Games in 196 BCE, presenting itself as a liberator rather than a conqueror. This propaganda allowed Rome to gain influence without direct annexation, a strategy it would repeat throughout the Hellenistic world. Macedonia was restricted, its power curtailed, yet Rome did not occupy its territory directly. By projecting itself as a protector and arbiter, Rome created a web of influence that extended far beyond Italian borders. Yet Rome's involvement in Greece was far from over. The Third Macedonian War, 171 to 168 BCE, emerged as Macedon, now under King Perseus, attempted to restore its power and alliances. Rome, having grown comfortable with its new position in the region, responded with overwhelming force. This war was characterized by large-scale battles and the application of lessons learned from earlier campaigns. Roman commanders understood the strength of Macedonian armies, the value of local alliances, and the importance of decisive engagement. The Battle of Pydna in 168 BCE demonstrated the continued evolution of Roman tactics. On the plains of Macedonia, the phalanx once again confronted the manipular legion, but Rome's flexibility and training allowed it to exploit gaps and disorder within the Macedonian formation. The result was a decisive Roman victory, ending the Antigonid dynasty and bringing Macedonia under Roman influence. By the end of these wars, the balance of power in Greece had shifted permanently. While many Greek cities retained a degree of autonomy, Rome had become the ultimate arbiter of their fate. Its legions were no longer confined to Italy or the Western Mediterranean. They now projected power into the heart of the Hellenistic world. The Macedonian Wars also provided Rome with lessons in combined arms, diplomacy, and governance, lessons it would carry into subsequent campaigns in Asia Minor, Syria, and beyond. Rome's victory in Greece reshaped its identity. The Republic transitioned from a regional power into a Mediterranean hegemon capable of challenging the great Hellenistic kingdoms. The wars also marked a psychological transformation. Roman citizens and soldiers now believed they could triumph over armies trained in the classical tradition, over phalanxes, elephants, and fortified cities. Confidence, adaptability, and strategic patience became central to Rome's approach to conquest, lessons forged through decades of engagement with a sophisticated and determined enemy. Culturally and economically, the Macedonian Wars opened Greece to Rome's influence while also exposing Romans to Greek art, philosophy, and governance. Greek cities became intermediaries of culture and trade, linking Rome to the Eastern Mediterranean. Rome absorbed Hellenistic knowledge, administration techniques, and diplomatic practices, integrating them into the Republic's own evolving system of control. And yet, the Macedonian Wars were more than just a series of military campaigns. They were a turning point in the history of Rome and Greece, demonstrating how a determined, adaptive republic could overcome centuries of Hellenistic military tradition. They set the stage for Rome's later dominance in Asia Minor, Syria, and the Eastern Mediterranean, while signaling to the world that Rome was no longer a power to be underestimated. In this story of conquest, adaptation, and diplomacy, we see a Rome capable of both crushing enemies and projecting influence, laying the groundwork for an empire that would eventually stretch from Spain to the Euphrates. The Macedonian Wars were not just battles for territory, they were battles for identity, for strategy, and for the right to shape the Mediterranean world for centuries to come. After Rome's decisive victory in the Second Macedonian War, the Eastern Mediterranean was transformed into a stage where Roman influence reigned supreme, yet the Republic's role was still one of manipulation rather than outright conquest. Rome had discovered that military might alone was insufficient to dominate a world steeped in centuries of diplomacy, tradition, and alliance networks. Greece was a patchwork of leagues, city-states, and monarchies, each with its own ambitions and rivalries. The Romans realized that to secure long-term influence, they had to combine strategic intervention with careful political maneuvering. Treaties and promises of autonomy became as powerful as the sword, and Rome's presence in the Aegean became a slow, deliberate exercise in shaping allegiance. The period following the Second Macedonian War was, in many ways, a rehearsal for Rome's future imperial strategy. Greek states, though nominally independent, became reliant on Rome for protection against neighbors and even against each other. The League of Aetolians, initially Rome's most vocal Greek allies, soon discovered that their patron could be as ruthless as any Macedonian king. Cities that resisted Roman demands were punished, while those that aligned themselves with Roman interests were rewarded. Rome had mastered the art of influence without formal annexation, a model it would replicate in Asia Minor, Syria, and eventually Egypt. The Third Macedonian War began as Perseus, son of Philip V, sought to rebuild Macedonian power and challenge Roman dominance. Perseus was a capable leader, well aware of his father's failures and the need to modernize his army. Macedon had recovered economically, and Perseus carefully cultivated alliances, using both diplomacy and intimidation to gather support among Greek states. Rome, confident in its system of alliances and experienced commanders, viewed Perseus as a direct threat to the stability it had imposed. The Republic's response was swift, sending legions into Macedonia under the command of Lucius Aemilius Paulus, a general determined to crush the Antigonid dynasty decisively. The campaign that followed showcased the evolution of Roman military doctrine. The Macedonian phalanx remained a formidable formation on open terrain, but Roman legions had become adept at exploiting its weaknesses. Manipular organization allowed Roman units to respond flexibly to gaps in the phalanx, while auxiliary cavalry and allied contingents harassed flanks and supply lines. Rome's logistical system ensured that armies could advance deeper into Macedonia than ever before, maintaining supply lines and communication over difficult terrain. The Battle of Pydna in 168 BCE exemplified this approach. On the rolling plains, Roman flexibility defeated the rigid phalanx, shattering Macedonian cohesion and killing or capturing tens of thousands of soldiers. The consequences of Pydna were immediate and far-reaching. Macedonia was divided into 4 republics, effectively neutralized as a political power and forbidden to maintain a standing army. Rome imposed tribute and monitored the region closely, signaling to other Hellenistic kingdoms that resistance carried a steep price. Greece, while not formally annexed, entered a period of Roman oversight that fundamentally altered its autonomy. The victory also demonstrated to the world that the manipular legion, honed over decades of Italian wars, was capable of defeating the sophisticated armies of the Hellenistic East. Even as the Third Macedonian War ended, unrest continued to simmer. The Greek city-states chafed under Roman influence, and uprisings were not uncommon. Rome's challenge was now political as much as military. Maintaining control required diplomacy, intelligence, and the careful balancing of local interests. Roman generals frequently acted as governors, mediators, and enforcers simultaneously. The Republic was learning that empire was not simply a matter of conquest. It was about shaping allegiance, controlling elite networks, and ensuring that power could be projected without constant large-scale warfare. The Fourth Macedonian War, though smaller in scale, reinforced these lessons. A brief rebellion by Andriscus, who claimed to be a surviving Macedonian royal, prompted Rome to intervene decisively in 150 to 148 BCE. The revolt was quickly crushed, and Macedonia was formally annexed as a Roman province. This marked a critical turning point. Whereas earlier wars had emphasized influence and indirect control, the annexation signaled that Rome could now impose direct governance when strategic interests demanded it. Macedonia's transition from independent kingdom to province exemplified the Republic's evolving imperial toolkit: conquest, integration, and administration combined with ongoing military vigilance. By the conclusion of the Macedonian Wars, the Greek world had been irrevocably reshaped. Rome had demonstrated its ability to defeat professional Hellenistic armies, manipulate complex political networks, and impose long-term strategic control without resorting to permanent occupation everywhere. The Republic had emerged not only victorious, but adaptable, capable of blending military innovation with diplomacy. Its legions, experienced in both Italian mountain warfare and open-field confrontations with phalanxes, were now among the most formidable in the Mediterranean. Culturally and economically, the wars opened the door for a new phase of Roman engagement with the Hellenistic world. Greek art, literature, philosophy, and science became increasingly accessible to Roman elites. The spread of Greek culture into Rome itself would accelerate over the coming decades, influencing education, architecture, and political thought. Meanwhile, Greek cities, though under Roman oversight, became nodes of trade, administration, and cultural exchange, connecting the Mediterranean world in ways that Rome would exploit for centuries. Strategically, the Macedonian Wars provided Rome with a blueprint for empire. The Republic learned how to use alliances, divide enemies, exploit political rivalries, and, when necessary, apply overwhelming force to neutralize threats. Rome's success was not inevitable. Hellenistic armies were capable and sophisticated, and the political landscape was fluid. Yet Rome's combination of adaptability, disciplined legions, and strategic patience allowed it to convert temporary victories into long-term dominance. The Macedonian Wars also reshaped Roman identity. The Republic now saw itself as a Mediterranean power, capable of confronting not just neighboring peoples, but the heirs of Alexander's legacy. Roman citizens and soldiers began to internalize the belief that no army, no city-state, and no kingdom could withstand the persistence and adaptability of Rome. This growing confidence would later justify interventions in Asia Minor, Syria, and eventually Egypt, laying the groundwork for the transition from republic to empire. In essence, the Macedonian Wars were not just a struggle for control of Greece, they were a testing ground for Rome's military, political, and cultural evolution. They revealed the limitations and strengths of Roman power, teaching lessons in strategy, diplomacy, and governance that would shape the Republic's approach to the Mediterranean for centuries. By the time the wars concluded, Rome had moved from regional hegemon to the central arbiter of the Eastern Mediterranean, a role that carried immense responsibilities and opportunities, but also set the stage for future conflicts and expansion. Rome's victory in Macedonia and the Greek world did not mark the end of challenges in the East. It was, in many ways, the beginning of a new era of engagement, adaptation, and confrontation. While the Macedonian Wars had demonstrated the Republic's ability to defeat phalanxes and impose influence over kingdoms, they had also revealed the complexities of ruling a region steeped in centuries of political rivalries, cultural pride, and military sophistication. Rome now faced the task of managing not only defeated armies and annexed provinces, but also fragile alliances, resentful city-states, and the persistent threat of unrest across the Aegean. The Republic had become a power capable of projection, but projecting power was only half the battle. Sustaining it required constant vigilance, clever diplomacy, and an evolving military strategy that could adapt to both terrain and enemy. The aftermath of the Third and Fourth Macedonian Wars transformed Macedonia from a kingdom to a Roman province, but the process was far from simple. The territory had been divided into administrative districts, and Rome installed governors to oversee military security and tax collection. Cities that had allied with Perseus were punished with heavy levies or garrisoned forces, while those that had supported Rome were rewarded with privileges or partial autonomy. This approach, a combination of carrot and stick, demonstrated a new Roman sophistication, the ability to consolidate power not just through conquest, but through governance. Yet beneath the surface, resistance lingered. Local elites chafed under the new authority, and cultural identities rooted in centuries of Macedonian heritage persisted, ready to flare up at the slightest opportunity. One of the most profound consequences of Rome's victories in Greece was the transformation of military doctrine and strategic thinking. Roman commanders had learned to engage the Macedonian phalanx effectively, exploiting terrain, flexibility, and the coordination of infantry and cavalry. They had discovered that disciplined, maneuverable legions could outfight even the most formidable formations on the battlefield. But they also understood that direct engagement was not always the best strategy. Diplomacy, manipulation of alliances, and the careful division of enemy coalitions became critical tools in the Republic's arsenal. Rome's future wars in Asia Minor and the Eastern Mediterranean often reflected this approach, combining political cunning with military preparedness to achieve dominance with minimal sustained conflict. As Rome's influence expanded, Greek city-states became more integrated into its political orbit, yet the process was complex. Many cities, such as Athens and Sparta, retained a veneer of autonomy, but were obliged to follow Roman directives in matters of foreign policy, military support, and taxation. The Republic cultivated a reputation as a liberator and protector, even as it imposed restrictions on sovereignty and enforced obedience. This duality allowed Rome to project power over a region with minimal direct administration, a method that would be repeated in Syria, Pergamum, and later Egypt. By presenting itself as a guarantor of Greek freedom, Rome created a system where loyalty was incentivized, resistance was dangerous, and influence was extended without constant occupation. Economic integration followed naturally from this political and military dominance. Greek cities became hubs of trade, supplying goods, manpower, and taxes to support Rome's growing ambitions. Roman merchants and administrators began to move into these regions, linking the Eastern Mediterranean with Italy through trade networks, roads, and maritime routes. The flow of wealth was matched by the flow of culture. Roman elites absorbed Greek art, literature, philosophy, and educational practices, while Greek elites learned the language, customs, and political calculations necessary to navigate Roman oversight. This cultural exchange, while unequal, laid the groundwork for a Hellenized Roman elite that would dominate the Republic and later the Empire. The psychological impact of the Macedonian Wars on Rome itself was equally profound. For the first time, Romans faced a class of professional, disciplined armies that rivaled anything they had encountered in Italy. Defeating these forces was not a matter of luck, but of strategy, discipline, and adaptation. The Republic learned to respect the complexity of foreign armies while simultaneously cultivating confidence in its own methods. Soldiers gained experience operating in unfamiliar terrain, coordinating with allied contingents, and confronting unconventional threats, from war elephants to sophisticated cavalry maneuvers. These experiences prepared Rome for the wider Hellenistic world and eventually for the challenges posed by Asia Minor, Syria, and beyond. Despite Rome's growing supremacy, the Greek world remained politically fragmented, and occasional unrest tested Roman oversight. The Achaean League, for example, maintained a degree of independence and occasionally resisted Roman authority. Its leaders were aware that the Republic was not omnipotent, and that careful exploitation of local discontent could sometimes achieve objectives without war. Rome, in turn, responded to these challenges with a combination of military force, strategic settlements, and targeted diplomacy. The Republic's ability to balance coercion and collaboration became a defining feature of its governance in the Eastern Mediterranean. The Macedonian Wars also altered Rome's long-term imperial strategy. Rome had learned that direct annexation was not always necessary to project influence. Strategic alliances, client states, and the careful division of rival powers could achieve the same goal with less cost and risk. Yet the wars also highlighted that permanent military presence was sometimes essential, particularly in territories with strong local identities or ongoing resistance. This dual approach, flexible, adaptive, and pragmatic, would define Rome's expansionist policy for the next century, guiding its approach to Asia Minor, the Seleucid Empire, and eventually Egypt. Militarily, Rome's ability to confront phalanxes and Hellenistic armies also influenced the evolution of its legions. Commanders emphasized flexibility, combined arms, and the ability to respond dynamically to changing conditions on the battlefield. The experience gained in Macedonia helped develop officers capable of independent decision-making, coordination of multiple units, and the integration of allied contingents. Rome's military education and doctrine, already formidable from campaigns in Italy and Sicily, now included lessons in large-scale maneuver, combined operations, and logistical planning over long distances, a foundation for future imperial campaigns. Ultimately, the Macedonian Wars were as much about shaping perception as they were about winning battles. Rome had to convince Greek states that it was a reliable protector, a force capable of ensuring stability, and yet uncompromising toward threats. This delicate balance of intimidation and persuasion became a hallmark of Roman foreign policy, allowing the Republic to extend influence far beyond its traditional borders without the immediate cost of full-scale conquest everywhere. The psychological dimension of these wars, projecting power while maintaining the appearance of legitimacy, was as critical as any battlefield maneuver. By the end of the Third and Fourth Macedonian Wars, Rome had established itself as the dominant power in the Eastern Mediterranean. Macedonia was neutralized, Greek city-states were bound by Roman oversight, and the Republic had gained invaluable experience in strategy, diplomacy, and governance. The Macedonian Wars were not a single campaign, but a series of conflicts that tested Rome's adaptability, endurance, and strategic acumen. They transformed the Republic from a regional hegemon into a Mediterranean superpower capable of projecting influence across cultures, landscapes, and centuries-old political systems. Rome's lessons in Macedonia, how to combine military innovation with diplomacy, how to manage conquered or allied populations, and how to integrate foreign experience into its own institutions, would reverberate throughout the Republic's later history. The Macedonian Wars had shown that even formidable, sophisticated enemies could be subdued, that influence could be wielded without outright annexation, and that a disciplined, adaptive army combined with a clever political strategy could reshape entire regions. These lessons would serve Rome as it expanded further east, setting the stage for eventual confrontations with the Seleucid Empire, the Ptolemies, and the wider Hellenistic world. The Macedonian Wars left Rome not only in control of Macedonia, but with a growing understanding of the broader Eastern Mediterranean, its politics, and its cultural landscape. By the mid-2nd century BCE, the Republic was no longer an outsider. It was a central arbiter, a power whose approval, guidance, or opposition could determine the fate of entire kingdoms. Yet this position brought challenges of its own. The Greek world was complex, fragmented, and proud, with city-states that had long histories of independence and sophisticated political systems. Rome now had to navigate these waters carefully, balancing military authority with diplomacy, coercion with collaboration, and oversight with the illusion of freedom. One of the most delicate tasks was managing the Achaean League, a confederation of Greek city-states in the Peloponnese. Though nominally allied with Rome, the League often chafed under Roman influence, viewing the Republic as a foreign power dictating policy. Rome responded by cultivating alliances within the League, supporting pro-Roman factions, and using limited military intervention when necessary. These actions were carefully calibrated. Too much force risked rebellion, too little allowed anti-Roman elements to consolidate. The Republic was learning to exercise power through subtlety as well as strength, a skill that would become crucial in its later Eastern campaigns. The diplomatic dimension extended to other Hellenistic kingdoms as well. The Seleucid Empire under Antiochus III watched Rome's victories in Macedonia closely. Antiochus initially pursued expansion in Asia Minor and sought to influence Greek affairs, particularly in areas where Macedonian power had waned. Rome, ever attentive to shifts in regional balance, saw the Seleucid presence as a potential threat to its new influence. In response, Roman commanders combined warnings, alliances with local states, and ultimately military intervention to curb Antiochus's ambitions, leading to the Roman-Seleucid War, 192 to 188 BCE. This conflict demonstrated how the Macedonian Wars had prepared Rome for larger, more complex engagements. Lessons in terrain, army composition, logistics, and the integration of allied contingents were now being applied on a larger stage. The resulting victory at Magnesia in 190 BCE decisively curbed Seleucid ambitions in the Aegean and Asia Minor, reinforcing the notion that Rome could not only intervene effectively, but dictate outcomes across multiple theaters. The aftermath of these campaigns marked a significant shift in Rome's role from regional hegemon to Eastern Mediterranean power broker. Greek city-states were increasingly expected to conform to Roman expectations, supporting campaigns, providing troops, and maintaining internal stability. The Republic's influence extended into political, economic, and cultural realms. Tribute payments, access to trade routes, and the supervision of governance allowed Rome to consolidate power without necessarily annexing territory everywhere. This approach reflected a sophisticated understanding of soft power. Control could be exercised through influence, incentives, and strategic oversight, not just through occupation. Economic and cultural integration accelerated as a result. Greek cities remained important centers of commerce, education, and art, but they now operated within a framework that prioritized Roman strategic interests. Trade networks linked Italy to Asia Minor, Macedonia, and the Aegean, facilitating the flow of goods, resources, and information. Roman elites increasingly engaged with Greek culture, adopting artistic styles, philosophical ideas, and administrative practices. This Hellenization of the Roman elite enriched the republic's political culture and informed future governance strategies, creating a fusion that would characterize Roman rule in the Eastern Mediterranean for centuries. Politically, the Macedonian Wars had reinforced a pattern that would shape the Republic: the use of military victories to enhance prestige, influence political decision-making, and consolidate power at home. Generals who commanded successful campaigns in Greece returned to Rome with wealth, influence, and the loyalty of veterans, all of which could be leveraged in domestic politics. This dynamic strengthened the link between military success and political authority, a connection that would have long-term implications for the Republic's internal stability and governance. Socially, the wars contributed to the Romanization of the army and citizenry. Soldiers gained experience operating in unfamiliar terrain, engaging with diverse armies, and coordinating with allied contingents from Italy and Greece. This exposure broadened Roman military capability and cultivated a sense of shared purpose across diverse populations. Citizens and soldiers alike internalized the belief that Rome could confront, adapt to, and defeat even the most formidable powers in the Mediterranean world, a confidence that would fuel expansion for decades to come. The Macedonian Wars also served as a cautionary tale for Rome. While victorious, the Republic recognized the dangers of overextension, the costs of occupation, and the complexities of ruling culturally sophisticated populations. Balancing coercion with collaboration, autonomy with oversight, and military strength with diplomacy became essential skills. Rome's ability to navigate these challenges would be tested repeatedly, from Asia Minor to Syria, and eventually in Egypt and the broader Near East. The lessons of Macedonia, adaptation, strategic patience, and flexible governance became foundational for the Republic's approach to empire. By the end of the Fourth Macedonian War and the annexation of Macedonia, Rome had achieved more than military victory. It had established a framework for long-term control, integrating conquered or influenced territories into a system that balanced military presence, political oversight, and economic exploitation. Greece and Macedonia, though retaining elements of independence, were now firmly within Rome's sphere of influence. The Republic had demonstrated the power of combining decisive military action with shrewd political strategy, creating a model that would guide its expansion across the Eastern Mediterranean for centuries. The Macedonian Wars were thus pivotal not only in reshaping the political map, but in redefining Rome itself. They tested the Republic's armies, refined its strategies, and expanded its influence into regions that had once seemed beyond reach. They proved that Rome could adapt to complex enemies, engage with diverse armies, and coordinate with allied contingents from Italy and Greece. This exposure broadened Roman military capability and cultivated a sense of shared purpose across diverse populations. Citizens and soldiers alike internalized the belief that Rome could confront, adapt to, and defeat even the most formidable powers in the Mediterranean world, a confidence that would fuel expansion for decades to come. By the end of the Fourth Macedonian War and the annexation of Macedonia, Rome had achieved more than military victory. It had established a framework for long-term control, integrating conquered or influenced territories into a system that balanced military presence, political oversight, and economic exploitation. Greece and Macedonia, though retaining elements of independence, were now firmly within Rome's sphere of influence. The Republic had demonstrated the power of combining decisive military action with shrewd political strategy, creating a model that would guide its expansion across the Eastern Mediterranean for centuries. The Macedonian Wars were thus pivotal not only in reshaping the political map, but in redefining Rome itself. They tested the Republic's armies, refined its strategies, and expanded its influence into regions that had once seemed beyond reach. They proved that Rome could adapt to complex enemies, engage with diverse armies, and coordinate with allied contingents from Italy and Greece. This exposure broadened Roman military capability and cultivated a sense of shared purpose across diverse populations. Citizens and soldiers alike internalized the belief that Rome could confront, adapt to, and defeat even the most formidable powers in the Mediterranean world, a confidence that would fuel expansion for decades to come. By the end of the Fourth Macedonian War and the annexation of Macedonia, Rome had achieved more than military victory. It had established a framework for long-term control, integrating conquered or influenced territories into a system that balanced military presence, political oversight, and economic exploitation. Greece and Macedonia, though retaining elements of independence, were now firmly within Rome's sphere of influence. The Republic had demonstrated the power of combining decisive military action with shrewd political strategy, creating a model that would guide its expansion across the eastern Mediterranean for centuries. The Macedonian Wars were thus pivotal not only in reshaping the political map, but in redefining Rome itself. They tested the Republic's armies, refined its strategies, and expanded its influence into regions that had once seemed beyond reach. They proved that Rome could adapt to complex enemies, engage with diverse armies, and coordinate with allied contingents from Italy and Greece. This exposure broadened Roman military capability and cultivated a sense of shared purpose across diverse populations. Citizens and soldiers alike internalized the belief that Rome could confront, adapt to, and defeat even the most formidable powers in the Mediterranean world, a confidence that would fuel expansion for decades to come. By the end of the Fourth Macedonian War and the annexation of Macedonia, Rome had achieved more than military victory. It had established a framework for long-term control, integrating conquered or influenced territories into a system that balanced military presence, political oversight, and economic exploitation. Greece and Macedonia, though retaining elements of independence, were now firmly within Rome's sphere of influence. The Republic had demonstrated the power of combining decisive military action with shrewd political strategy, creating a model that would guide its expansion across the eastern Mediterranean for centuries. The Macedonian Wars were thus pivotal not only in reshaping the political map, but in redefining Rome itself. They tested the Republic's armies, refined its strategies, and expanded its influence into regions that had once seemed beyond reach. They proved that Rome could adapt to complex enemies, engage with diverse armies, and coordinate with allied contingents from Italy and Greece. This exposure broadened Roman military capability and cultivated a sense of shared purpose across diverse populations. Citizens and soldiers alike internalized the belief that Rome could confront, adapt to, and defeat even the most formidable powers in the Mediterranean world, a confidence that would fuel expansion for decades to come. By the end of the Fourth Macedonian War and the annexation of Macedonia, Rome had achieved more than military victory. It had established a framework for long-term control, integrating conquered or influenced territories into a system that balanced military presence, political oversight, and economic exploitation. Greece and Macedonia, though retaining elements of independence, were now firmly within Rome's sphere of influence. The Republic had demonstrated the power of combining decisive military action with shrewd political strategy, creating a model that would guide its expansion across the eastern Mediterranean for centuries. The Macedonian Wars were thus pivotal not only in reshaping the political map, but in redefining Rome itself. They tested the Republic's armies, refined its strategies, and expanded its influence into regions that had once seemed beyond reach. They proved that Rome could adapt to complex enemies, engage with diverse armies, and coordinate with allied contingents from Italy and Greece. This exposure broadened Roman military capability and cultivated a sense of shared purpose across diverse populations. Citizens and soldiers alike internalized the belief that Rome could confront, adapt to, and defeat even the most formidable powers in the Mediterranean world, a confidence that would fuel expansion for decades to come. By the end of the Fourth Macedonian War and the annexation of Macedonia, Rome had achieved more than military. The Macedonian Wars also had significant political repercussions within Rome. Commanders returning from campaigns in Greece gained prestige, wealth, and loyal veterans, reinforcing the connection between military achievement and political power. Generals like Flamininus and Paulus leveraged their victories to influence domestic policy, cementing the precedent that success abroad could translate into authority at home. This dynamic would shape Roman politics for centuries, contributing to the rise of powerful military leaders whose ambitions sometimes challenged the very republic they served. Strategically, the wars cemented Rome's role as the principal power in the eastern Mediterranean. With Macedonia subdued, the Republic could monitor and intervene in the affairs of other Hellenistic kingdoms, from the Seleucid Empire to the Ptolemaic realms in Egypt. Rome's dominance was reinforced not only by its military victories, but by the perception of its authority. Greek city-states, recognizing both Rome's strength and its strategic patience, increasingly deferred to Roman judgment in disputes, alliances, and conflicts. The Republic had become the ultimate arbiter, capable of influencing outcomes without constant warfare, yet always ready to apply decisive force when necessary. The Macedonian Wars also highlighted the importance of Rome's adaptability and long-term vision. Early encounters with the Macedonian phalanx revealed the limitations of conventional tactics, prompting reforms in training, battlefield organization, and logistical planning. Over time, the Republic developed a military system capable of projecting power far beyond Italy, integrating allied forces, coordinating cavalry and infantry, and exploiting the vulnerabilities of even the most disciplined enemies. These lessons would prove invaluable in later campaigns across Asia Minor, Syria, and the broader Hellenistic world, forming the foundation of Rome's enduring military dominance. Socially, the wars transformed Roman soldiers and citizens alike. Campaigns in Macedonia exposed troops to new terrains, cultures, and combat styles, fostering a sense of shared purpose and expanding the Republic's horizons. Citizens increasingly internalized the belief that Rome could confront and defeat even the most formidable enemies, instilling confidence and a willingness to support further expansion. Meanwhile, the cultural exchange with Greece enriched Roman society, introducing new philosophies, arts, and educational practices that would define Roman intellectual life for centuries. Yet, with these victories came new challenges. Administering conquered or influenced territories required ongoing attention. Rome had to balance the autonomy of Greek city-states with the need for strategic oversight, manage local elites, and suppress unrest without undermining its authority. The Republic's success depended on its ability to combine coercion with collaboration, force with diplomacy, and immediate military action with long-term political planning. These lessons would become central to Rome's approach in Asia Minor, Syria, and later Egypt, shaping the Republic's evolution into an empire. By the end of the Macedonian Wars, Rome had achieved more than military conquest. It had established a model of regional dominance that balanced military power, political influence, and cultural integration. Macedonia was transformed from a kingdom into a province. Greek city-states were bound within Rome's sphere of influence, and the Republic had demonstrated its capacity to govern, influence, and project power across diverse populations and complex political landscapes. Rome's experience in Macedonia provided the blueprint for future imperial expansion, teaching lessons in strategy, diplomacy, governance, and the integration of diverse cultures. The long-term impact of the Macedonian Wars cannot be overstated. They marked Rome's emergence as the dominant Eastern Mediterranean power, capable of reshaping political systems, economies, and societies to align with its strategic interests. The Republic had learned how to adapt to sophisticated enemies, maintain influence over culturally advanced populations, and project authority across vast distances. These lessons would echo through subsequent campaigns, guiding Rome as it moved toward full imperial control of the Hellenistic world. The Macedonian Wars ultimately reshaped both Rome and Greece. For Rome, they provided military experience, political authority, economic integration, and cultural enrichment. For Greece, they marked the end of autonomy as an independent power and the beginning of life under Roman influence, where city-states retained appearances of freedom but were strategically aligned with Rome. The wars demonstrated that conquest was not only a matter of defeating armies, but also of mastering diplomacy, governance, and cultural influence, an approach that would define Roman imperialism for centuries. As we reflect on the Macedonian Wars, it is clear that they were far more than a series of military campaigns. They were a crucible in which Rome learned the art of empire, adapting its legions, refining its political strategies, and projecting authority across a culturally sophisticated and politically fragmented region. They were also a turning point that redefined the Mediterranean balance of power, establishing Rome as the ultimate arbiter of Greece and setting the stage for the Republic's expansion into Asia Minor, Syria, and Egypt. And so, we are left with a question that echoes across history. Was Rome's rise in the Eastern Mediterranean inevitable, or did the Republic achieve dominance only through a rare combination of adaptability, strategy, and opportunity? The Macedonian Wars may have ended, but their lessons, consequences, and legacy would resonate throughout the centuries, shaping the world in ways that continue to fascinate us today.